Hello, so welcome back. This is an unexpected video. So it will be Thursday's video when we look at all the verses used to support PSA and see if they are being interpreted with using a literal grammatical historical hermeneutic, or if they are being interpreted using, it's called here, metaphorical, metaphysical, ungrammatical, anachronistic, ahistoric hermeneutic. So that one is coming out Thursday. So today was an unexpected video. I just got out of church and they sang a song called Jesus Paid It All. According to Google, it is by Christian Stanfill. So the lyric that I want to talk to you about is the one that says, "Oh, Jesus," I forgot it already. "Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead." All right, paid my debt is anti-biblical because the debt was, we've talked about the word aphesis. The verb is aphiemi. The debt was aphiemied. It was canceled. It wasn't paid by an innocent third party. This is the same word in the Old Testament, the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, used to talk about the Jubilees, when everyone was set free from their debts, free from slavery, free from renting out the land. The land reverted back to the previous owners. All the debt was canceled. No third party steps forward and pays off all the debt for it to return. The slave's debt isn't paid off so that they can be free. It's just canceled. It's just canceled. That's the whole point of the Jubilees. And when Jesus quotes the passage in Isaiah, he is saying the year of the Lord's favor. He's referring to the Jubilees and he's saying, I will fulfill this. And so Jesus is saying, I am the one who will aphiemi your debt. So you could sing the line, "He paid my penalty," and you could sing the line, "He canceled my debt," but it's unbiblical for the line to be, "He paid my debt," because the debt's not paid. It's been canceled. And if you go to Blue Letter Bible and you type in the word, well, just type in Hebrews 9:22. and then hit Strong's. Do this with either in the NSAB or the King James, and the Strong's number will appear. If you're getting the Strong's number grayed out, the Strong's button is because you didn't pick those two translations. So go to Hebrews 9:22 in either the King James Version or the NASB and click the Strong's, and then go down to the word forgiveness or remission, whichever one it is. Without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sin, and click on it, and you will see that the word is either aphesis, the noun, or aphiemi, the verb. And look at what the definition is, and the definition is canceled. And then if you continue scrolling down, it will start to show you every time that word is used, every single time, and you'll realize it's everywhere. It is all over the New Testament. And it's in the parable where the king has mercy on his servant who owes him $1 bazillion, and he cancels the debt. No third party steps forward and says, I will forgive the debt. I will pay the debt for this this servant. No, the king just cancels it. He doesn't expect payment from him. So that's just what the word means. And Strong's, Dr. Strong, is actually a Calvinist. And so he's being very honest when he says that that is what the word means. The word aphesis means the debt is canceled. Canceled as if the debt had never incurred, as if the crime had never been committed. So when I say that it's right that you could say that Jesus paid the penalty, okay, because the penalty is death. Jesus paid that penalty. He didn't owe it. He didn't. If the wages of sin is death, and wages is your hours put in, the hours that you worked, okay, your hours of the sin, all the sin hours that you worked, and then your paycheck is death. That's a literal interpretation of Romans 6:23. So that's the penalty Jesus paid. He didn't put any of those hours in. He didn't sin. And yet he received a paycheck of death. So yes, you can say that he paid our penalty, the penalty of death that he didn't earn. His blood purged, blotted out the handwriting that said we owed a debt, that the record of sin that bound us to Satan, it's gone. That document is now blank because his blood purged it clean. This is why the first half of Hebrews 9:22 talks about how blood is shed for cleansing. Blood cleanses. So it's without the shedding of blood, because it cleanses us from sin. There is no there is no cancellation of the punishment. If that had not happened, the punishment cannot be canceled. So he had to die, but he didn't die to pay off God the Father. He died to purge our record of sin clean. Your future self is going to pop into this video and show you what the paperback looks like, because it came in. I might even read parts of it to you. Future me is going to pop in and do that now. Hello, this is future me. And I am here to say my paperback came in. I'm so excited. So this is it. And as you can see, it is not an overwhelming read. That was very intentional. Some people have read it in one sitting. Some people have taken a couple days. But the point is that it's very reader friendly. And but I think I am going to read a little bit to you, just because there is a part that's relevant to the song lyrics that we talked about today. So, and the main character, his name is Mick. He is in the back of an ambulance hooked up to an EKG machine, and he is talking to a paramedic named Trina. Both these characters are ex-evangelicals. They're kind of like sharing their deconstruction stories with each other. He was, when she found him unconscious, the t-shirt he was wearing was an atheist t-shirt. The one that says, because God sending himself to sacrifice himself to himself to save us from himself is a little bit much for any logical person. And she says, I have a shirt similar to that. And this kind of strikes up their conversation. So the main character, Mick, is pointing out that his theology professor was adamant that PSA is historical Christianity. And that if you reject historical Christianity, your only other option is being an atheist. And this is why he is an atheist, because he could not reconcile the cognitive dissonance that comes with believing a God who can't forgive you without punishing an innocent person. Anyway, she was trying to point out to him that the early church did not believe in PSA, which shows that it's not historical. And he says, yes, PSA is historical, because in class, this professor showed him quotes from the early church fathers that allegedly showed that they believed that Jesus suffered our penalty. So since that was the line from the song, I'm going to read that part from you. She has just explained to him that in PSA, Jesus suffers a metaphysical death. He can't suffer as your substitute, because he can't suffer a literal death as our substitute, because we all die. So that's where they are at this point. So let me guess, he said after a minute. When the early church used the word penalty, they used a literal hermeneutic in which death meant physical death. Yes, Trina said. The early church, like the Jews for thousands of years before them, and the Eastern Christianity for the last 2,000 years, believed the wages of sin and the penalty Jesus paid was physical death. Jesus was sinless, which means he paid our penalty, the penalty of sinners. Mick took a deep breath. I don't think Reverend Milos, that's his seminary professor, or any other evangelical would see it that way. When the early church fathers say that Jesus paid our penalty, how can you possibly know for sure that they don't mean it vicariously? Well, for one thing, if you read the passages surrounding the alleged PSA proof quote, the church father is always talking about physical death, Trina said. And last time I checked, Christians have died for the past 2,000 years. So Jesus cannot have died a physical death as their substitute. And for another thing, the phrase paid our penalty doesn't have only one meaning. Mick arched a brow. What other possible meaning could it have? Let's say the usual cost of admission for an amusement park is $100, but first responders are allowed in for free, Trina said. Now let's say that a group of 5 people are in line. 4 are regular citizens, but 1 is a first responder. How much money will the ticket master collect? $400, Mick said. But what if the first responder also pays $100, Trina said, even though he didn't have to? You can imagine the other 4 whispering to themselves, wow, he paid our price. Mick nodded, his eyes growing wide. Now, obviously those 4 aren't implying that he paid their tickets, right? Mick let out a low whistle. So when you read a church father saying Jesus paid our penalty, you have to look to see if they are talking about physical death, and then if they are, then the church father cannot be talking about penal substitution. Trina flashed him a smile. You got it. So I'm going to read the part where Mick opens up to her. It's about halfway through the book. And he opens up on why he deconstructed. During the last several semesters of Bible college, I have been wrestling with various issues surrounding the character of God. He swallowed, staring at the ceiling to avoid Trina's gaze. But everyone said it was normal to have questions. So after I graduated, I went right into seminary. Then my brother got sick. By the time the doctors figured out what was wrong, he had stage 4 cancer. It turned out that he'd been exposed to toxic chemicals in the house my parents bought right after I'd left for college. The real estate developer had forged an environmental report to cover up the presence of toxic mold and other hazardous materials in the contaminated soil. Mick let out a bitter laugh. He didn't want the financial loss of having the entire residential community condemned. He sensed Trina stiffen beside him, but she said nothing, allowing him to continue. I came back to be with him in the hospital, but Mick's voice trailed off, and he took a deep breath. It was too hard seeing him like that, bald, weak, barely able to keep anything down. My father rarely spoke, and my mom just cried. Mick clenched his eyes shut. I left him and went back to seminary. He paused, realizing he hadn't opened up about this to anyone before, not even Bill. I went to the seminary chapel every day, praying and pleading with God to heal my brother. There were days I felt like I was praying to the walls. But then there were other days when my faith was strong, days when my phone rang and it was my mother's number, and I honestly believed she was calling to tell me it was a miracle, that the doctors couldn't find any cancer. Mick stared into the blackness outside the windows. The rain streamed down the glass in rivulets. It was one of those days when she called to tell me that he was gone. I felt like God had just stomped me into the ground. Here I was with a bachelor's degree in theology, attending seminary, wanting to spend my life serving him, trying to understand his character, and he took away the one thing that meant the most to me. It took Mick a moment to continue. The back of an overhead highway sign briefly appeared in the rear windows before shrinking into the distance. The ambulance slowed as it veered onto the exit ramp, the motion causing Mick's stomach to lurch. For a while, I thought God must have been punishing me for my doubts. Then I wondered if he was punishing my brother for something, because if one of us wasn't being punished, it just didn't make sense. If God is all-loving and all-powerful, then why didn't he heal him? Why didn't he protect him from being exposed or getting sick? Why didn't he influence my parents to buy a house in a different neighborhood? Mick paused. The rhythmic drumming of the rain filled the silence, the world beyond an indistinct smear of light and motion as if the city wept for him. The standard Arminian response that bad things happen to good people because God values free will wasn't comforting at all. Seriously? The free will of a greedy real estate developer is more valuable than my brother's life? How is that supposed to be a comfort? Can they not hear themselves? Do they not realize they believe God values the free will of murderers, rapists, school shooters, sex traffickers, and Lake Volta slave owners more than he values their victims? That it's more important for God to uphold free will than to protect people from being killed, women from being violated, or children from being enslaved or gunned down. Peripherally, he could see Trina sitting silently beside him. Somehow, even though she was a stranger, her presence anchored him. But then I came across something called open theism in one of my textbooks. Ironically, the textbook was refuting it as an unbiblical explanation for why God allows evil. According to open theism, God is all-knowing and that he knows all possible outcomes of any course of action human beings can take. But he doesn't have exhaustive knowledge of every future detail of our lives because of our ability to make free will choices. If I understand it correctly, this means that sometimes events aren't fully determined until they actually happen, which can prevent God from being able to stop bad things from occurring. I'm probably not doing it justice, but the point is, open theism at least gave me a way to believe that God wanted to protect my brother and had the power to do so. He just didn't know in time. Mick's body clenched. He took a deep breath, trying to release the tension. When I mentioned this to Reverend Milos, he was adamant that open theism was entirely unbiblical, even bordering on heresy. He insisted my brother died for God's glory, and said my anger at God came from my refusal to humble myself to his sovereignty. According to him, as sinners, we don't deserve anything good anyway, and I should be grateful for the 17 years I had with my brother, instead of being angry that God decided to take him. After all, God was fully within his rights to do so. The rain beat against the back windows, making the streetlights look like crystallized blurs. After a while, Mick said, finally, I realized it no longer mattered to me, which it was, whether God cared more about the free will of the wicked than protecting the innocent, or whether he was an apathetic megalomaniac obsessed with his own glory. I no longer wanted anything to do with him. A silence lingered between them, as though Trina was waiting to see if he was going to say more, which was ironic because he talked far too much. After all, she was a complete stranger. Your brother didn't die for God's glory, she finally said, speaking so quietly that Mick had to strain to hear her. Death does not bring God glory. The early church knew this. They knew that death is God's enemy, an enemy that God wants to destroy. Mick felt his pulse quicken, his chest tighten, caught in a vice. You mean they believed death was God's enemy, not they knew death was God's enemy, he said, his voice tight. God doesn't exist, remember? Trina didn't respond. Mick's eyes narrowed. A non-existent entity doesn't have enemies. Still, she said nothing. Something felt off. Mick's pulse pounded in his ears. The way you talk, it sounds like you actually believe what the early church believed just because they believed it. True Christianity's validity stems from its historicity, Trina said quietly. You said you had a shirt just like this, Mick pounded the mattress beside his thigh. I said I have a shirt similar to that, Trina replied calmly. But whereas yours says atheist, mine says PX. What the hell is PX? Mick raged. Trina rolled up her sleeve to reveal a tattoo of a door with a large number 3 and a banner inscribed with PX across the bottom. It's short for Paleo-Christianity. Paleo as in first? Original? Trina nodded. On my deconstruction journey, I found authentic historical Christianity, which makes it an intellectually honest alternative to both evangelicalism and atheism. Okay, so he pretty much explodes on her. And this is when he finds out that she is not an atheist as he had assumed. And he gets very, very, very ticked at her. And but I won't go into any more because that would give out spoilers. Yeah, so there is a example of the story. So hope you enjoyed that. Okay, until next time, keep standing firm.